I used to say
Mhm.
when I got into the industry, I could make the best. I didn't drink coffee, but I can make the best coffee for the people I work for, and I learned how to read minds.
Right.
You know, and that's how my career got started. And then I think I was on Weird Science, and some friends came told me, well, Fred the Hammer Williamson was coming in town to do do a movie, and he's looking for, because I was a second assistant director. A first assistant director is who runs a movie. He's the man. And so Fred and I had lunch together, and Fred told me, because I was like 25, 24. Yeah, I'm on big budget movies. I got to say, I was a little cocky. And Fred looked at me and he said, you've been spoiled by big budget movies. You really don't know how to make movies. You learn how to make movies when you don't have a lot of money for a movie. He said, I can teach you how to really make movies. And I liked him. And I said, okay, let's do it. And to jump ahead again, I think 14 movies with him. And he was right, because I was used to movies at millions of money. Been a lot, wasted and thrown away. With Fred, it's only a million, maybe 2 million on the high end that we'd have to make movies. So you have to do and learn everything. And I had to learn everything about. One of the things that Fred told me, and another friend of mine told me, that you need to learn how to do every job on a movie set. So I learned every job on the movie set, even to the point of one summer. I took the entire summer to apprentice at a camera shop, because there was a time with 35 millimeter cameras for Panavision. The only place you could rent a Panavision camera was a company called Victor Duncan. And it was Victor Duncan, Chicago, Detroit, LA, New York, and Dallas. And I apprenticed for an entire summer at Victor Duncan, Chicago, to learn 35 millimeter cameras, everything there was to know about a 35 millimeter camera. Yeah. So, and there was stuff like that. And even when things were slow on movies and I would do commercials, I would work as a grip. I'd work in the electric department. I'd work in the set dressing department. I would get a job in every department to learn it. It's not that I was going to pursue a career in those areas, but I needed to know what it entailed, because I knew that I wanted to be a producer, possibly a director. And the one thing you need to know is what everybody's job is, because how can you tell people, how do you know if somebody's sandbagging you, or what? Because time is money in the industry if you don't know what that job entails. So I learned every job in the industry, you know, and, from that, it just became, you become known, and the projects, word of mouth, they just come to you. And like I said, in between, I would work on television commercials, and that's actually how I ended up in Michigan, because I was called to produce an Amoco oil commercial with Aretha Franklin in it, because Aretha had said that she wanted a black producer, and the ad agency was out of Chicago, and they knew who I was. So they sent me to Detroit, and I was supposed to be in Detroit for 2 weeks. It ended up being 3 months. Yeah. um, and then from that, I started doing, I was getting calls to produce. First, it was for Chrysler at the time. Um, so I started producing Chrysler commercials, and then in between, I take off and go do movies. Um, in 1989, I was producing a film with Fred, and I got married. And I married a Detroiter, so it was easy for me to live in the suburbs of Detroit. Then, because in this industry, you work everywhere, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, I've worked all over the world. And then I
Wow.
like it because it's not, because I lived in Hollywood, I lived in New York, I lived in Houston for a minute, um, but the reality was being in Michigan, because you're attached to the industry because it's what you do, but you're not engulfed in the whole Hollywood thing because it gets old quick. and you keep your sanity, and you end up being you're normal, and I like being normal. And I even took 10 years off at one point when my daughter was born because I wanted to be around my kid when she was growing up. And then afterwards, I, called my agent because everybody thought I'd lost my mind when I came to Detroit anyway. And I said, all right, let's rock and roll again. And then it just started back. And by then I was also directing too, directing and producing. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I ended up here.
Wow, man, that's phenomenal. I mean, you just named so many icons in the industry, and you got a chance to work with them. And you, like you said, over the years, you've learned each and every position and aspect of creating a film or a TV commercial. Like you said, even learning how to master making the coffee, all the way to being a
Yes,
director. That
yes.
that's phenomenal. Wow.
And it's interesting the people
Hmm.
you meet because the Joe Silver movie that I did, Streets of Fire. Well, actually, I did a TV series. First, I did a TV series for NBC called Chicago Story, and one of the stars was the actor Richard Lawson. And Richard is who was, well, now they're getting divorced, was married to Beyonce's mom up until that. And we also did Streets of Fire together because he was one of the actors in that. So we've literally been friends for 40 years. For
Wow.
40 years. And I remember calling him, and because whenever I'm in LA, it becomes one of those, I'm just calling everybody because you stay in touch anyway. And I called him and said, "Man, I heard a rumor that you're marrying Tina Knowles." He said, "Towns, I've known Tina since I was in my early 20s. So so I think they stayed married about 7 years. I think it's only been the last few months that they announced the divorce. But you just meet because there's a lot of really, really nice people in the industry. You know, I stayed in touch with Robert Downey Jr. for years. Um, I've run into Tom Cruise a few times over the years, and we laugh about risky business. So you form relationships with people that are pretty lasting. I still have whatever people are still alive that worked on Blues Brothers. We're still friends today. And
Wow.
every anniversary of the movie, we all end up on the same like Facebook stream talking about it. And I was even in LA a few years ago, and where I was staying at the Chateau Marmont, Dan Aykroyd came in, and he was with a bunch of like studio people, and friends of mine were with me, and they said, "Go over there and talk to him. Go over there and talk to him." Like, I don't do that. I had just me and Val Kilmer had just had this conversation, and I said, "Okay, I'll go." And I started walking over to Danny, and he stood up and he stuck his hand out and he started looking at me. He says, "I know you." I said, "Dan, if you remember me, you've got the best memory on the planet." He said, "Marvin, you were the youngest person on the Blues Brothers. How could I forget
Wow.
you?"
And the Blues Brothers, man, that's an iconic film. That's a staple in American history, man.
Yes,
Then to be a
yes.
part of that in any shape, form, or fashion is just phenomenal.